In this episode of the Founder to Fortune podcast, I'm thrilled to talk to Tarang Vaish, founder and CTO of Granica. Long before he became the co founder of a VC backed startup, Tarang was an employee of startups, where he would tell his hiring manager, often the CEO, that he wanted to start his own company. This level of transparency is rare and yet invaluable. I'm so fortunate that Tarang decided to share his authentic view on all things startups in this conversation. For example, he tells us why most startups fail, and no, it's not because of bad ideas, weak technology, or poor timing. We talk about why solo founding is exceptionally harder than it looks, why technical brilliance rarely saves you, and why you should treat AI like an intern. If you're building a company or thinking about starting one, this conversation might change how you think about risk, leadership, and what really matters in the early days. Tarang, it's so good to have you here today. Thank you for taking the time to come to the Founder to Fortune podcast.
Thank you, Vidya. Excited to be here. Let's get started.
Awesome. Tarang, you have had an amazing journey as a founder. You were previously working at a startup, and now you are the founder and CTO of Granica. Why don't you tell us a bit about your background?
Right. I grew up in Delhi, DPS. Half the kids in Delhi went to DPS RK Puram. I'm one of them. I enjoyed maths. I enjoyed being curious and enjoyed anything that was interest for me. Computer science became very interesting to me from the beginning, and I was very fortunate to go to IIT Guwahati and did my computer science there. I felt very fortunate to be there and worked hard. And the same thing then led to going to Stanford. So when I went to Stanford for my master's in computer science, I always felt coming out of Stanford that one day I want to do my own startup. So every company that I went to, I was very fortunate to be among great peers. And then they kept on pushing me, I kept on enjoying, and I kind of figured out my niche that I'm a curious person, like from the beginning. And I love to not give up on problems, and startups always have a plethora of those issues all the time. And I love learning, growing. That's always been there, and there is always some interesting technical product, people challenges that comes in front of you. And I also love like sharing, like as I have grown, I have seen that just sharing your knowledge with people and growing as a team, that has also been very rewarding. In nature wise.
And by the way, I just have to say that the theme of sharing is something common for people who get on podcasts like this. Thank you for doing that.
Yeah, thank you. Another thing that I would want to share is I'm a video gamer. I enjoyed gaming from my childhood, and I still love video games. That's something that keeps me going. Just like sports and other things that people have. So that has instilled in me, that sense of competition and sense of like, okay, never giving up and always trying to get the highest score possible. So that is something that I feel has always trained my mind. So video games are not all bad, just a side
Of
topic.
course, it helps to have a leaderboard.
Yeah, so now I want to talk about the startup journey. So the first startup I joined was Vivante, and they were a GPU chip design company. So I got an opportunity to work in a small team, and I slowly evolved to become a software architect there. And we would have lots of commercial partners and companies that we worked with. Some companies like Google for Chromecast, or BlackBerry for their mobile devices, or BMW's GPS and navigation system. So anywhere you would put a screen, you would want to put a GPU behind it, and our company would be providing the GPUs to such embedded devices. So this was a great opportunity to learn and build technology and being part of that small team and be very customer focused. So what I loved about that startup was that I could see myself taking technology and fitting it as soon as possible into a product. Hardware is very different than software. You don't have any flexibility in terms of timeline. There is a date when the chip is coming out, so you have to work on that, or the chip is already out and you have, let's say, 2 weeks to bring up the chip and make sure the product goes on to market. So these are high stakes, and that was awesome for me to work on. The second experience was Cohesity, where I wanted to work in a more data and storage area after Vivante, and I was very lucky to be one of the early people joining Cohesity and worked very closely with the CEO, Mohit Aaron. I learned a lot there around distributed systems. The idea behind Cohesity was this was a mature market. Like backups had been there for decades, and every time a data company is built, you have to build it from scratch because you have to solve a scale problem, you have to solve some competitive edge, efficiency problems. You may have some new applications that have come in. So data companies are built from scratch and they take like 4 to 6 years to build. Because of that reason, how to build best in class like a storage product at Cohesity. Why did we have to go best in class? Because have to compete with every other storage company out there. And
Yeah.
whatever you build, it is make or break. You will not make money maybe for the first decade of that company, and you may not succeed at all if you don't have a competitive edge. Yeah, so loved working there, and so after that I got in touch with Armor Blocks. So the product was around email security, where we would secure your inboxes. Typically, people would use regexes and firewalls to prevent spam, but they were pre ChatGPT time trying to use ML models to predict if an email is malicious or not. So I learned a lot of interesting things. I also learned what to not do
Yeah.
or what is very hard to do in a startup. Essentially, what I learned is machine learning value is not very clear and it requires a lot of infrastructure and a lot of trial and errors. It is much harder to productize compared to the previous two companies. Like you're selling storage, you're selling GPUs, you're in or out, right? The spec is very clear. When it came to Armor Blocks, the spec is not very clear, the value is not very clear. You have to provide a SaaS product. And then also, I found that the tech stack in the cloud is on top of the cloud, right? So a lot of stuff are just abstracted away. So trying to build a efficient ML-based SaaS product, being something at as cheap as let's say $30 per month is very hard. So building SaaS is matter of scale and all that, and it is where most of the SaaS companies struggle, right, to scale up. So that was great experiences. Worked again with radio.
And quick plug in there. So DJ Sampath, the CEO of Armor Blocks, was on this podcast. So for folks who want to check that out, I think that'd be an amazing conversation for folks to listen to. And I also want to come back to the story of Armor Blocks, but please continue.
When it came to the cloud, we found that there were no alternates. You go to S3, you use S3, you don't have a choice. You want to use compute, you have to use AWS, right? So they have kind of like an Apple experience. Everything is given by them and you use them. And it is actually the best way to get started. But once you start reaching a scale, once you start going into production, that is where things hit the fan, and you really have to make sure that you have the right architecture. And that is the struggle with every cloud company, and that is something that I really understood, and that's something that helped me build Granica.
That's awesome. Something that you had shared with me when we spoke earlier is that you told the CEO of Armor Blocks that at the time of interview, or maybe this was after you had joined Armor Blocks, that you actually were interested in becoming a founder. So I'm curious to know, like, how did DJ actually respond?
Yeah, so I was very upfront. I wanted to tell them from day one that I'm doing this startup to learn, and actually that is something even Mohit Aaron from Cohesity said to me. He's like, okay, if you're going somewhere after leaving my company, you should start your own company. So people believed in me, and DJ also believed in me that I would be able to do this someday. So people will not be excited to hear that okay, your employee, first employee wants to leave the company right as soon as possible. But in fact, DJ was quite the opposite. He said, and we agreed to have a monthly session just on one-on-one couple of hours where he would train me how to start a company.
Really amazing, both on your side to be so upfront and sharing that. And
Yeah.
then also, I think on DJ's side, that he was so generous and spent his time and energy in helping you there.
Yeah.
That's a great story. Okay.
So coming to Granica and coming to my co-founder, he was at Pure Storage, and when we met, we found this common thread that did so much hard work in our companies, and we built really strong products that are best in class. But when it comes to the cloud, we haven't built a system ground up that actually is working for data systems in the cloud, right? So what does that mean, right? So when you are a storage system, you buy a hard drive, etc., you paid for it once, and then you keep it around, and then you just, whenever after a year or two, you spend $1 million, buy a new product. But in the cloud, when you write data to the cloud, you pay for not using your data and that actually like a petabyte costs you $200,000 for not using it.
Wow, that
So
is a
like,
crazy way to think about it.
yeah, and then actually, if you want to use your data, it is going to roughly cost you 3 to 4 times more. So 1 petabyte of data is going to cost you anywhere from $500,000 to $1 million every year. So this is the cost of using or not using your data. So you want to use more of your data, but its cost is just going to escalate. And petabyte was something that was still reasonable. We have reached hundreds of petabyte scale now. So you can see that how complicated quickly things have become. When we started, a petabyte to us was a big number. And what we were striving for is to build that alternate. But our theory was that big data streams that are going to be born in the cloud, let's say LiDAR data or satellite data or genomics data, they don't really have an efficient way to be stored in the cloud. And we started focusing on those unstructured data. But then over time, especially since ChatGPT launched a couple of years back, everybody pulled us towards data lakes. Every company we saw had petabytes or tens of petabytes of data working on some kind of structured data lake kind of environment. So switching to what we do as a company, Granica, we are a data optimization platform for your AI and big data applications. We basically look at just your data layer. You can have any query engine on top, you can have any storage below that. We are just focused on your data layer, and we are optimizing it for storage and for your applications. So for storage is things like we reduce the size of the data using our custom compression algorithms that could give you 50%, 70% reduction. But on the application side, we also improve your query performance, and we can also improve your AI models training on the same data. So these are all like possible by our engineering and research that goes in together. So as part of our team, besides me and my co-founder, we have Professor Andrea Montanari from Stanford. He has an information theory, background and expertise, who brings in that knowledge of how to best use your data. So one intuition I can give you is, let's say, JPEG format, right?
Mm-hmm.
JPEG is a specific format, much better for images. Why is it not using gzip or ZSTD? It's because the application there is your eyes, and the eyes understand and infer data differently than what a computer does. So a
Mm-hmm.
JPEG actually maintains and exploits that knowledge to compress things in a way that it are still going to be good enough for an eye to read and see data.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So similar to that, like, we can look into applications and AI systems and understand what is the real information that the user needs, what is noise and what is information, and how can we focus on that. So funny enough, like compression and AI are not very different because compression just means focusing on the most important stuff and compressing it down to that small kernel. And AI models are also saying what is the math, what is the relationships that I need to learn so I can reproduce it later. So
Mm-hmm.
there is a lot of information theory overlap in what we do.
Yeah, wow. It's really amazing. So, Granica is, as I understand, a data optimization platform. You talked an incredible team, amazing pedigree, both from your chief scientist officer as well as yourself and your CEO. And you talked about the storage piece and the applications piece. Question about the compression that you talked about, Tarang. So, you gave a nice example about JPEG and how compression algorithm in that case is optimized for what a human can perceive. I wonder, do you do that also for different modalities? So for instance, whether the data is predominantly voice versus text versus audio or maybe mixed, your algorithms take into account that?
Historically, we have focused on lots of different modalities, but I think the theme for the last couple of years has been structured and data lake kind of data sets. So primarily table. So people filter down their voice and audio and other kind of signals into structured data, because it's not just that they convert audio into structure. There is a big data pipeline that is curating, labeling, figuring out what is the way to learn on your data. But then where we come in, The intuition is again similar to compression, where if you have, let's say, repeated data that is just showing you daytime videos of, let's say, a self-driving car, and then only 10% of your data is showing nighttime driving. So guess what's going to happen? More accidents are going to happen in the night than in the day. So we can actually understand when there is repeated information, which is actually giving a negative impact on your model training. And we can remove that. Just like compression can remove redundancies, we also remove redundancies. We can balance the information. We can make it more optimized for your models to learn from your own data.
Okay, so this is optimized for AI models as opposed to humans. And okay, that makes a lot of
So
sense.
if you tell us which model you are using, we actually have our models, which we call surrogate models, and they actually help, train your models based on, our models output. So one of the problems we solve for the customers is if you double your data and you send it to your AI model, it's not going to give you double the value right back. It's not going to get much better. So we are figuring out how can we enrich the data by, let's say, dropping parts of your data or enhancing parts of your data to overall actually improve your models.
And could you double click on what you mean by enhancing data?
Yeah, so there is a whole field of synthetic data generation, which means that for a given model, you just come up with completely synthetic data. But when I say enhance, it is actually using the real world data that you have and actually extending that so your model gets better. So it is still synthetic, but it is going to be more lifelike. It is generated based on your existing data, but it is still going to be a net positive to your models. So the interesting thing is that it's very hard to say how a given data set is impacting your models, right? So you expect that all the data that it is learning is giving it a positive impact, but our research shows that that's not the case. And we can be very selective about what we should not train on, but we can also actually extend it to train on more data than that already exists. So it's synthetic data generation based on existing data patterns and what your model objectives are.
I'm curious to know what industries are you seeking to serve with Granica? Could you
Yeah.
talk about that a bit?
Yeah, so like basically our buyer is somebody who has petabytes of data. 1 petabyte is good enough. And most of the companies that are a petabyte, for any company is growing 40% year over year. That is the general industry trend on data growth. So we have customers who started with a petabyte in few years have grown to 20 petabytes organically. So this is applicable to any company which is becoming more AI centric, or they use AI and analytics to run their product, right? So if you're not using either of the two, if you're just using for observability and logging and compliance, you may not be, the big data growth companies, but most companies are actually using AI more and more, means that they are generating more data. So,
Gotcha.
like in terms of like industries, you can think of like social media companies are actually number one in that, and then SaaS companies, any big enterprise tech companies, healthcare is big, and financial companies also are big. All of them are data companies under the covers, have hundreds of petabytes of data.
And then you have multiple product lines, right? One is the compression product line. Another is I think it's called Screen,
Yeah.
your security product. Are the buyers for these products the same as in like within a big company, big enterprise that you go to? Is it the chief data officer, CIO, or is it a combination of chief security officer?
One of these people has become the chief AI officer,
Yeah.
and they are actually would be our biggest, buyer from two perspectives, right? One is that they want to get better ROI from their system. So big data growth, they all understand that this is not efficient and viable. So they want to cut cost, and they want to also redirect, their resources towards AI, like upgrading their infrastructure, reducing cost, improving the velocity, maybe getting away from some static data science, operations to more ML driven data science teams. So we work with the data infrastructure team and the data science team, but they both report to the AI team now. So when we start the Crunch product, data optimization funds everything after that. So typically we would start with Crunch, because this is like just obvious to the customer, great value, immediate value, and then the data science teams get engaged. And privacy is mostly focused on data science. You don't want to learn on PII data, so that comes under the same umbrella. Comes cross-sell after Crunch.
Obviously, you have a very strong research team and you're building your own models or at least training and fine tuning your models. I'm curious to know what it takes for you to productionize these models and keep them updated across multiple customers. Like, how much of solved in is science is it versus more art and duct tape kind of a solution?
So it depends on what stage you start the development. If you are starting from static and then going to models, it's harder. But we are different in the sense that we give the model and the product to the customer to run on their own systems. So they are, I would say, much more sophisticated than us, and we piggyback on their pipelines and their regression systems to continue to leverage our model. In short, right, like we work with the design partners to prove value before we deploy, and then we leverage whatever infrastructure they have to continue to manage the models.
Taking a more zoomed out view, you've started in at the GPU level. You did data backups, recovery. When you're slowly climbing up the stack, as you think about like how data management is going to evolve in the next 3 to 5 years, what do you predict?
I think of it as entropy. Things gravitate towards the most efficient ways of doing things. One of the example of that is S3, cheap and deep. Similarly, now if you have your ML data training pipelines, you want to feed data into big ML, and you want to have a structure like a data pipeline that processes the data that gets to this phase, it is going to be some form of data lake. So my prediction is that everything will become data lake, because as they scale they become a data lake. So for example, observability could all become a data lake. Security companies will also form data lakes when they are like looking at the security events. You could have built your own custom databases, but if you have a high scale, the open source world has already built a very nice scalable platform, and that's going to move there. I feel healthcare or financial also will all move their systems to a data lake centralized system. So all the data silos are going to slowly converge is one thing. And then because your application is AI, it needs some big data underneath that is going to look like a data lake. So people will streamline over time. Data silos are going to go away. Everybody will have a very similar data stack.
This is how it was several decades ago. So you're saying that's going to come back in fashion.
Yeah, physics, right? Cost of doing business. So naturally people are gravitating towards it. Like iceberg is something we are very excited about.
And you have a compute engine agnostic way of working with your data too, right? Which is also quite advantageous.
Yeah.
Sure. You started Granica with the thought of doing something with unstructured data, and then now you're focusing on structured data. So as far as long-term trends are concerned, do those things come together?
So you can think of unstructured data more like analog data, right? It is more information and more interesting, and not always in the shape and form that you would consume it as is, but is better to use digital even if it is analog. That is the same equivalent of going from unstructured to structured, right? In order to consume it, just like digitized, structured is a much easier way to consume data. So there is always going to be a much better way to just convert that into structured data and then consume it, right? So my thought is, yes, there would be algorithms and systems that will be built directly on that, but otherwise most of the stuff will decompose into structured data.
Is that happening to the extent that you are seeing in enterprises?
I would say yes. There is not a easy way to learn on video pipelines or
Yep.
images. We have done a lot of research on learning directly on compressed images, but then scaling is always going to be challenging.
For sure. Wow, it is definitely going to be a very exciting another decade for data with size, complexity, use cases, everything exploding.
As a founder, I like always knew like data and security are always evergreen. So if
So
you want to
true.
build a company, security every year, you have new security surfaces that you have to take care of, attack vectors that nobody could have thought about. Same thing with data actually, because what happens with data is, like I mentioned, it takes 4-6 years to build a strong data company, and one data company kind of has to solve so many tangential problems. Like you have to solve the scale problem, the query latency problem, data integrity, resiliency, and so on. So it takes a lot of time, and to do all of that, you have to really hard code it to a certain kind of parameters or infrastructure or systems. But then once you do that, you have a great time. But then another 2 3 years later, a new medium comes, and then whatever you did doesn't work anymore. So the analogy is, companies started with hard drives, but when hard drive and SSD came, new companies built on top of that. Then only SSDs became cheaper. So companies like Pure Storage came and took advantage of it. Then cloud came. So there were companies that were doing hybrid between like on-prem and cloud. Now we are doing a cloud-only storage company. See this as like a natural progression. So every time the scale goes 10x or the medium changes, if let's say S3 becomes 10x faster, then a new company will show up taking advantage of it. So it's just fascinating and it's just fun working on these problems.
Fascinating, Indian. The key is to exit before the rug gets pulled out of your feet. Or you do that to yourself and move on to the next wave, right?
Yeah.
So that's a good segue into advice. When I listened to you talk last time, there is so much wisdom that you can share with founders.
I would say the number one risk to start a company is people risk. Are you a people person? Do you have a co-founder that is going to complement you? I don't think it's exponentially hard to build a company alone. It is exponentially hard to get it funded alone unless you really have done companies before. It's almost impossible to be a single founder starting a company. People risk means also hiring, managing the people in your company, keeping them motivated. So people risk is very high. It is sometimes you have everything else checked, but you don't know how to talk to people. That's a people risk, right? The other thing is technical and product risk. First time founders think, that $1 billion idea needs to be so technically out there that nobody else will be able to solve it. There are obviously products like that, but you cannot have this and other risks at the same time. The third risk is business risk, right? Product market fit kind of risk. Like, do you even have a market for that kind of product that you're building? So you could be building a flying car, but maybe, it is going to be costing $20 million. So then both are a risk for you. You also want positive vibes around you. A lot of people see the negative vibes that startups are too hard, you can make good money elsewhere, why do it? So people get disheartened. So number one thing, I would say realistic optimism.
Realistic optimism. That's quite oxymoron. That, okay, so we're coming to the tail end of this conversation, Tarang. I typically like to ask, how do you keep yourself up to date?
One of the go-to places is obviously podcasts. So you learn about different founders, their stories. You learn how they think, and even if it is a 10-minute or 5-minute window of listening to something, it just like feels incredible. It just keeps me motivated or excited, or it could be that I learned something today and I can apply it. But it's not just about consuming information. So in terms of information that I'm gathering, I'm always understanding and trying to internalize it. I don't need to listen to a lot, but whatever I'm listening, I'm trying to internalize it and see how it is appropriate for me. I like to mix it up. I like history, science, and if I really want to have fun, that enjoy some new video games and recharge your brain once in a while. But I mean, I am always keeping myself in an uncomfortable position, like especially with AI. I feel most people are giving up too soon using AI tools. They have a mental model that it is good for XYZ, it's not good for other stuff, and let's only use it for XYZ, like auto completion, for example. But I want to give it all the way. I am 100% AI, so I don't code myself, but I, code a lot without writing any single line of code. It may take 2 3x amount of time, on doing this. To me, an AI is like an intern, that has come into the company, and you have to slowly figure out what are the checks and balances that you have to put around it so you can trust it, right? So you have to, if you just say, an intern that comes into your office, hey, go solve, this hard problem, he will fail. But how can you make a human better? One of the ways, I have a trick with AI models I can share is that I ask it to ask me questions. So, I'm like, hey, this is a task XYZ, right? Can you ask me questions about what you understand and what are your gaps? It actually can give you back 3 5 nice questions, and I explain it, and then I now give it a better prompt with better clarifications around everything that should be done, and then it does a better job, right?
You
So
train your AI to train you.
yeah,
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 love that. Love
yeah.
that. Awesome. Well, Tarang, this was such an amazing conversation. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Vidya. Yeah, lovely talking to you. And all the best to all the founders, who have been listening. You can reach out to me on LinkedIn, etc. I'm happy to help you guys.